Rachel is RACHELTAYLOR.
Great. And before we get into the interview questions, I just have a few preliminary questions for you. Can you tell me what dates you worked for RCA?
Yes, I was there from 1975 to February of 1992.
Okay. And what was your job title?
Secretary.
Great. Okay. So how did you get your job at RCA?
There was an ad in the paper for secretaries, and I went down and had an interview, and they asked me to come back the second day, and I had another interview, and I was hired along with about maybe 7 or 8 of the people that came down for the interviews. We all got hired, about 7 or 8 of us on the day I was there anyway.
Okay. Can you describe what you did at RCA?
Yes. I first want to tell you I was hired at RCA on 42, Route 42, that RCA in Deptford. I was there for a week. My boss was transferred to Cherry Hill.
Okay.
He said, I know you took this job because you wanted to be near home, but would you like to come with me? And I said, yes. So I went to Camden with them. We were there about 6 months, and that particular division of RCA was sold to a company called Viz. So our branch was part of the branch that was sold, and so we were laid off on Friday and hired again on Monday in Camden, and that's how I got to the Camden facility of RCA.
Okay, and what department were you in at that point?
When I went to Camden, I was hired into the market research department originally with my boss for the week and then for the 6 months. But by the time I was in Camden, I was hired into the purchasing department, and I was there for several months when an opening occurred in the powerhouse, as it was called. It was located out on the river, and it was separated from all the other buildings because we were sort of isolated. And I went down for an interview with Mr. Getz. His name was Bob Getz, and he became my boss. He hired me, and I became a secretary down at the powerhouse for the M80 group, which stood for maintenance, and the P70s were the powerhouse people that generated all the electricity and so forth through the plant. And I worked with Bob Getz until he retired, and then his right-hand man at the time was a fellow named Ron Sanasak, and he became my boss, and I worked with him at the powerhouse for a number of years. And then a new person came into the company by the name of Diane Daly, and she worked in the environmental department, and she always used to come through our department. And one day she asked me if I would like to work for her, and my position down at the powerhouse was they were starting to phase out various positions. So I did go with her, and I ended up in the environmental lab, and that's where I was until we were eventually laid off when the big GE takeover eventually took place. And we worked under GE for a while, but then eventually we were all laid off.
Okay. What kinds of benefits and wages did you earn under RCA?
I don't remember the exact amount of money, but I know it was higher than most of our contemporaries that were out there working, and what they earned. I don't remember the dollar figures at this point, but I do remember we had excellent benefits, which were like you had your life insurance policy, your medical policies, you had what they called an income savings where the company matched your dollar, and then we had a pension plan as well. And I do have to say, once I was laid off from RCA, none of those benefits, I mean, you maybe picked up 1 or 2 of the benefits, but never the quality of benefits that we had when we were RCA employees.
What were your relationships with your coworkers like?
Oh, I loved it. It was like your family. I mean, you spent more time with them than you did your family, to be very honest with you. And we made a lot of lasting, shall I say, friendships that continued even after we became laid off. And one of my friends that I met there when I started down at the powerhouse was a lady named Barbara Jackson, who worked for the company for about 37 years, and to this day, we're still very good friends. And a lot of the fellows and girls that we met there, we remained friends with outside the company, and to this day, we still organize our yearly get-together for the RCA M80 and P70 groups, and we meet once a year at the coastline, and I still am involved in setting it up along with Jerry Vogletic, who eventually worked for my boss, Ron Sanasak, and then when Ron Sanasak retired, Jerry kind of became the new Ron Sanasak. So, and Jerry's still there, and he works in, I think it's called L3. He's the boss of the M80 group in L3. And we're still friends to this day, personal friends outside, outside of our company relationships as well.
Were there a variety of ethnic groups while you worked at RCA?
Oh yes, quite a few. Our floor, we had a mixed group of black people and white people, and eventually, one of the vice presidents, I can't think of his last name, but I think it was Garcia, Andy Garcia, and I believe he was of Puerto Rican nationality, and he eventually became a vice president there. And most of the other vice presidents were, of the white race, but he became a vice president while I was there as well.
What were your working?
And we also had some lady vice presidents too.
Oh, very good.
Very young, attractive woman. I can't remember her name, but she was very pretty and very attractive, very friendly, and she worked with the company until she got married, and then her husband didn't want her to work anymore, and he was being transferred, so eventually she left the company, and then another young fella came in, and it was rather unusual to see people that young to be like vice presidents and so forth. A young fellow named Paul Jankovic came in, and he also was a vice president, very young, because most of the vice presidents were usually older, much older people, and they came in, and we had an ethnic vice president, we had a lady vice president, and we had some very young vice presidents with younger, newer ideas. So it was quite interesting, and they all blended well.
What were your working conditions like?
Well, we had some different type of working conditions. Working in most of the regular buildings, everything was kind of normal, but when you worked down at the powerhouse, it was a bit different because underneath you were all the various shops. So when we used to walk into like a garage type setting underneath, or a bunch of shops, shall I say, and so even vehicles used to drive through every now and then. And then you would climb, because there was no elevator there down in the powerhouse, you used to climb up all these steps, and then voila, you were into this beautiful setting of an office. It was like night and day from the lower level. And above us is where the coal, when the furnaces and all were run by coal, so above us was stored all the coal. And every now and then you'd get rained on by coal dust, and you'd have it all over your desk and so forth. But then you kind of got used to it, and then eventually they got most of that resolved, but every once in a while you just see some coal dust splattered around your desk. So that was a little different.
What was one of your most memorable experiences working at RCA?
Oh, I think the people that I worked with were really great. They made me feel very welcome and very family oriented, and they all knew I liked Elvis Presley, and I used to have pictures of him spread around. And it was really neat because a lot of times when the fellows would travel outside the United States or even within the United States, they would come back and have presents of all this odd Elvis Presley memorabilia that you didn't see here in the United States, and they would bring it back to me. Or if they were somewhere where they couldn't get Elvis Presley paraphernalia, they used to bring this perfume or something from all the foreign places they would visit. It was really a very nice oriented group, and if there was a tragedy or anything that occurred to any of our co-workers, everyone was right there to help. They were a very, very good group of people. Even to the animals.
What animals?
Well, when Mr. Crosley worked as the head of the M80, any strays, he used to have, he would take them in, and he had little, under the dock where 24 building was, he had all these little houses for them so that they wouldn't be little street dogs with nowhere to go. And he even had, he would come in even on a weekend if no one was working to make sure they had food and water. And I myself can say, I took home a dog that was ready to be given over to the dog catchers. So I asked the boss up in the machine shop if it would be all right if I hid him up there till the dog catchers left. And they let me hide him up there, and I took him home with me that night, and I named him Nipper, and I had him till the day he died. And then another day I was out there, and there was this big white dog, I forget, a Great Pyrenees, and he was huge. And again, he was going to the dog catchers, so I asked if I could put him in one of the sheds out there till the dog catcher left, and they put him in, and I took him home, and I had him till he died. And then because we were on the water, there were a lot of Maori ducks, and we used to name all the ducks and whatnot. Well, one day, one got hit with the car, and he was hurt, so he wasn't dead, but he was hurt. So a couple of the guys in the pipe shop took the 2 ducks in and kept them in the shop. So at the end of the day, I took them home with me, and I took them to the vets. They got them all fixed up, and I named them after my aunt and uncle. I took them home, and I kept them. And then another time, I took another stray dog home, and I named her Rosie because the dog catchers were always after her, and she jumped out of a building, and I finally was able to get a hold of her. I took her home, and then I took home another dog, and I had 11 puppies in my car that day, and I took them all home. I got them all home but one, and the one that I didn't get a home for I kept, and I had her. She was a shepherd mix, and I had her till she died also. They lived to be, most of them lived to be in the neighborhood of, I guess, 12 to 17 years that I had them. So I took quite a few dogs and animals home. The ducks were the weirdest that I took home. And well, I lived on a little farm, so I had the room to be able to do it, so that's what I did.